a good place now. You are listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, I'm going to be talking about guilt. What is guilt? And how to realize and recognize when guilt has taken over your life. Many of us deal with guilt on a daily basis. Guilt impacts our lives. It stops us from doing things. It keeps us in certain situations. It makes us feel bad. And many times, more often, we don't really know what's really happening. We just feel the inability to move, to act. We feel trapped a lot of times in our day-to-day life, and we don't realize where it's coming from. And so in today's show, I'm going to explain what guilt is and how to realize if it's taken over your life and some of the things you can do today to really recognize and really remove that guilty feeling as much as possible, especially when you're doing nothing wrong. You know, guilt is interesting because guilt to me is very empty. It's something that many of us feel on a constant basis, you know, whether we're dealing with our family or our friends or boss or whatever, or even our children, we can feel guilty. You know, small things like taking a vacation, we can feel guilty that we're not working. You know, perhaps we tried to call, you know, our mom or dad on the phone for their birthday, and it was a late call and we didn't get in touch with them, and we feel guilty. You know, perhaps we weren't able to make an event or a birthday, and we feel guilty. Or we didn't send a card. Perhaps we want to take a journey or we want to move to a different state because of better or more opportunity, but we don't want to leave our family because we feel bad. We feel guilty. There's so many things. Perhaps maybe you're in a marriage that's not working and you're trying everything you can, but you don't want to leave the marriage because you feel guilty. And guilt is one of those things that really holds us in a position and makes us feel bad. Now, there are some forms of guilt that aren't that bad. You know, the concept of doing the right thing and feeling guilty if you killed someone or hurt somebody or, you know, did something like that. And so that guilt wards off you doing those types of things. So guilt has some impact and in some sort of a positive way. But I do think that we experience guilt a lot more than that. And I believe that this unresolved guilt is what really causes us to have anxiety, resentment, fear even, fear of what our life is going to become, fear of the things that we haven't gotten to do, fear of the things of, you know, what if I could just live my life and do this, but I can't leave these people and I can't do that and I can't walk out on this and I got to do this and overwhelmed with guilt. I found that guilt makes people feel trapped. It makes you feel trapped. You know, I've had some folks that I know that taking care of family members who are sick, and they care about their family members, but, you know, it's interesting how, you know, family dynamics are challenging, and you can care about your family, but they might not actually treat you very well. And so there you are trying to help somebody that's possibly, you know, got a diagnosis of cancer or heart disease, and the person that you're trying to help and to take care of doesn't really treat you well. And so you have that kind of that bipolar feeling. And what I mean by that is part of you wants to help them and the other part feels resentful because you're helping them because they don't really show you that they care and or even appreciative of the fact that you're helping them. But you feel bad because you don't want to leave them high and dry. And so when you show up to help them and they treat you bad or they treat you poorly or they don't even really speak to you or they put you down or they find things to put you down about, there you are stuck in this catch-22 because of the guilt. And I understand that we want to help folks, but it can be really challenging when you're trying to do the right thing, but other people don't see it, they don't respect it, and they don't, I mean, just a pat on the back goes a long way. I feel like when we have that guilty feeling, when it's something that has that type of shift where, you know, you're doing something because out of the goodness of your own heart, but part of it's guilt, right? You feel guilty if you don't do it, right? You feel shame if you don't do it. Maybe you're guilted into doing something because you're the only one that's there. And I understand a good example is, when folks get older and the parents get older and certain siblings live next to the parents and certain live away out in another state. And it seems like the burden of the responsibility lies with the child, the adult child that's now, that lives near the aging mom or dad. And it seems like all of the stress and all of the guilt lays right there. And it seems like the folks that are out of town don't seem to have to feel it. Now, I'm sure that some of them do feel guilt, right? Some guilt that they're not there. But they're not feeling guilty enough to move. They're not feeling guilty enough to move because they know that the sibling that's there will take care of them. And then, you think about somebody trying to live their life and trying to pace all this out, i.e. trying to help the aging parent, trying to take care of their own responsibilities, trying to take care of their own family, and all of that resonating and crescendoing to a certain point where the person feels out of control, stressed out, not sure where to head, where to do, what to handle. And then a lot of times what happens is that sibling begins to lash out at the other siblings for not being there, or they don't even communicate at all because they feel as though they are being duped, they're being bamboozled, they're the one that's having to take on the brunt of everything, and occasionally sister and brother will come in for a visit every 9 months. Guilt is interesting. Because what I found is that guilt can help us in small things, like, not doing bad things in our life. But what is bad things in our life? And I found that the more and more that we feel guilt, the lower our self-esteem is. The more that we feel we are bad or something is wrong with us. And this stuff plays a part in our life that can really throw us off from creating the happy and the gratitude reality within our life. I found that guilt can make us reluctant to really enjoy our life. We feel like we're not good enough to have that party for our birthday, and we'll just go another birthday without celebrating because we don't really deserve it. Or we don't go and do something because we feel guilty about spending the money. It's not worth it. I'm not worth it. That's too much money. And so we guilt ourselves out of doing a lot of things in life. We guilt ourselves out of taking that vacation, out of fear of not being at work, or out of fear of anything. And then the guilt of spending the money, and the guilt. And that's the interesting ratio when you think about it, because, think about the types of guilt that we feel. And I think that some of the guilt obviously could be quite mild. However, I think that some guilt can really lead to a self-punishment and really a beating down of the individual. I found that the more guilt we feel, the more stagnant we become, okay? And I've seen it on both sides. I've seen people get very stagnant. I've seen people literally become and get into a state of flux. And really that state of flux is really that uncertainty. And the fear of making the wrong choice, the guilt of choosing something that might be better or might be a better choice for them, but is not helping all concerned. There's a lot of things there, and I find that guilt is one of those things that we don't really talk about. I found that guilt is one of those things we don't really talk about. You don't really sit around the table with your friends and go, you know what? I felt really guilty today about doing X, Y, Z. Yeah, it was a really painful feeling, and, I don't know. How about you? Do you feel guilt today? Did you feel guilt? Usually that's something we don't talk about. That's not something we talk about. It's not something we bring up. It's not the focal point of a conversation. Quite honestly, it's the exact opposite. We don't talk about it. And I think guilt plagues many of our lives. But in order to understand guilt and to understand why it's impacting us and to understand why we're in the state of flux, why we're in the stagnation, why we can't move in action to do something, we have to really think about where this guilt is coming from and why we're putting it on us, and then why are we acting from this guilt. I feel that many of us were raised with guilt. It was a technique used. And I think it's gone through generation upon generation. I don't think it's just your mother or father that invented guilt. I would like to say that I really think that generation upon generation has used guilt to keep people in line, to do the right thing, to take care of certain things that they need to take care of, and the list goes on. But I think throughout history, as guilt becomes more prevalent, guilt is used in many ways psychologically within our own being to hold us back. And what is it holding us back from? I think it's a sophisticated distraction used to get us off target, for us to not follow our hopes and dreams and to live our true life. I'll be explaining more when I return from break. In the meantime, go to YouTube, Google YouTube, and search Ashley Burgess, Ashley Burgess, Berges. You'll find new content every week on issues and topics that are important to you. Stay tuned. Live your true life perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
Turn it up and jump in the deep end on Perspectives. Now, here's Ashley.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, I'm talking about guilt, what guilt is and how to realize when guilt has taken over your life and what you can actually do about it. Guilt really impacts many of our lives on a daily basis. It takes us off target. It makes us feel bad about ourselves. It keeps us in a state of non-action, and we feel trapped. We feel stagnated. We feel overwhelmed that life is passing us by. We're not doing what we want to do. We're not creating what we want to do, and we feel bamboozled by life. I find that when I feel guilt, I'm in a state of flux and uncertainty, not knowing what needs to be done, and it impacts my life adversely because I'm not creating. I'm not making things happen. Instead, I'm kind of sitting there wondering what's my next step. I get off target. I get off purpose. I begin to question my validity. I question the reasons for what I'm doing. And then it's almost like you start backtracking. It's like you get on the sidelines of life and you start looking around and you go, oh my God. Oh my God. And I found that guilt really does hold you back. It's a sophisticated distraction used to get us off target. It's a sophisticated distraction, right? I found that guilt is like created within our mind to distract us on, well, look over here. Ooh, gosh, I can't believe you did that. That's horrible. Or I can't believe you were even thinking about that. Just thinking about that is horrible. You're a bad person. Oh, God. And then you go, oh, God, I can't believe I was thinking about that. That was bad. That was bad. I better stop thinking about that. I shouldn't think about that. I can't think about that. Something positive come into my head, please. And that's the sophisticated distraction. And all of a sudden, you're no longer living life. You're thinking about, well, what a bad person you are and the things you've done in the past and how you've screwed over somebody. And the list goes on, right? Is it real or is it fantasy? It's interesting because the first thing that I think about being the distraction of guilt is that the first comment you make is, I can't because of X, Y, Z. I can't do this because of X, Y, Z. Can't do what? Can't do what? What can you not do? I can't do what? I can't live my life. I can't go back to school because people depend on me. Or I can't go out and have a bite to eat because I need to, I really need to secure my money. I can't do that. Or I really can't take that extra time for myself because of the busy work day. Or, I really can't work out because other people are depending on me. And all this guilt. And I got this job, but it's out of town. And then I'd have to move away from my family. And that's going to be bad. And it's interesting because it becomes this problem. And it kind of festers. And the guilt kind of magnifies and matriculates off of other guilt. Have you seen that? How you get a little sprinkle of guilt, and then it's like you get a little more, and you get a little more, and you get some more, and you get a little more. And all of a sudden, you're like full-blown guilt on everything. And you start creating these crazy scenarios in your head, and you're feeling really bad, and you're thinking, oh gosh, I must be a really bad person to be thinking about this stuff. And it takes us off target from living our true life because we feel so bad about things and we're so fearful. And so we choose not to do that. So, for example, perhaps you've been wanting to go back to school. Perhaps you feel like you're in a dead-end job, but you have a couple of kids, and you have a wife or a husband, and you know that they have a lot of stuff on their plate too, so you feel guilty. Well, if I go back to school, then they're going to have to take care of the kids these 2 nights out of the week that I was taking care of them, and I can't let them do that, and so I'm not going to say anything. And a lot of times we kind of get into the martyr system, you know what I mean, where we're like, well, I can't do this for the good of the family, you know, because of the guilt. And then we just kind of like stick that down, that guilt. And what happens from that is we fester anger and resentment. And so we begin to resent the people in the family because we can't go back to that school. We begin to resent and have anger because we can't take that moment for ourselves because we believe we can't. Okay, so we need to be working out for our health. I need to be working out more for my health, just speaking directly from myself. And I catch myself, you know, being at the office till late, not doing it. And then I feel guilty because I get home so late that I don't really get to see my husband. And so I'm like, well, I don't want to go work out and take more time out of that. And then you kind of feel guilty about it, right? Then you get home and you eat and you're like, God, I really wish I would have worked out. I mean, I really need that to feel better, you know, and then you feel a little resentment. Well, if you know, I could have gone and worked out, but, you know, I had to come home and eat. And it's like, well, now we're misappropriating the resentment because my husband's not going to get on me about working out, not going to get on me about, you know, taking care of my body. But I'm in that guilty conscience going, well, you know, already at home, I haven't seen him. You know, I feel really guilty about that. And then you feel guilty about what? Not working out. So then you feel guilty about, like, not taking care of your body. Now you feel really guilty. So you feel guilty about the eating, and then you feel guilty about not going to the gym, and then you feel bad about, like, you went to the doctor a few months ago, and the doctor was going off on how you should have been working out. Then you feel guilty about not doing what the doctor ordered you to do, right? And then you see a friend of yours that you made a pact with that you said, I'm going to work out 3 times a week, and you will too. And you see them, and they go, hey, I've been working out 3 times a week, man. You really inspired me. And you go, oh, God, I feel guilty. I feel like I lied to that person. And you just kind of put your head down. Oh, that's good for you. That's great job for you. Yeah, I'm trying to keep it up too. It's just been a little busy. And then you have all this guilt. So you have all this guilt, and then you kind of have resentment. Well, if I didn't have to work so hard, you know what I'm saying? If I didn't have to work so late, then I could have gotten there. And I'm a little resentful of that. Not get paid enough to work this late. And you see how this begins to crank up, and the anger and resentment seems to get out of control. And I've realized that a lot of the guilt is usually put on us by ourselves, but sometimes we do have the outside guilt givers, okay? The outside guilt givers. And usually the outside guilt givers are people that, well, they know us, usually. They might be related to us. They know how to push our buttons. You know what I'm saying? And guilt is used to control, okay? It's a control factor. I'm going to guilt you into feeling some way so I can control the outcome of what happens, right? Very powerful stuff. I feel it's like witchcraft and wizardry. Witchcraft and wizardry. I feel like it's like totally, very crafty. It's one of those things that you can get somebody to do anything. They don't want to do it, but they feel really guilty, so they go, I've got to do it anyway. And so it's this control. You know, I've found that I've had it from outside sources have tried to guilt me into doing something when it's not right for me, okay? That's the last tactic they use is when it's not right, when it's not the right thing, when it's not a good idea, and then they go in for the guilt. Like, you're going to miss out on this, or you know, if you don't get in now, you know, it's the last chance, or, you know, I mean, think about it. You got this offer, but nobody else got it, or whatever it is that they make you, they guilt you into. They don't make you, but they guilt you, and then you can choose to either be guilted and to follow them down the primrose path, or you can choose to create boundaries and say, no. We're not going down this path. I can see what's going on loud and clear, and you have a great day. It can be a little harder to create these boundaries with family. Husband, wife, sister, brother, mother, father, aunt, uncle, grandma, grandpa. You see what I'm saying? That's when guilt is very effective. Okay? The Outside Guilt Givers Association. That's a good one, isn't it? The Outside Guilt Givers Association, the OGGA. The association, the OGGA, the OGG Association. I like that. The outside guilt givers. I'm going to start my own little group of people. Like, I'm going to have my own private club, the OGG Association, the outside guilt givers. I love that. Yeah, I'm going to do that. Okay, so let's get back to this. So the outside guilt givers that you know really well are the ones that can really use this as a control mechanism to control the outcome. A good example, when you have folks that, got this amazing job offer, but they got to move out of state, and now they feel guilty because mom and dad are there, and they feel guilty, and, and then the parents say, we're not going to be able to see the grandkids. We might not live that long on this planet. And you're going to go to Chicago? You're going to move to Chicago? And we're not going to see these kids. I mean, we might only have a few years left on this planet. By the way, mom's only 55 or 60. A few years. It could be like 50 years. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, you get guilted and you go, oh, God, that's true. Maybe we should stay. But what happens is sometimes it's the right thing to do, and sometimes you look back with great resentment because that could have been the career, that could have been the pivotal point in your life that could have changed things for you in a positive way forever. And then there comes the resentment and the arguments on the major holidays like Christmas, where everybody's having a good time. You have a couple of extra eggnogs, and the resentment and anger goes. Well, I would have been in Chicago. None of this would have happened. So when I return to be talking more about the outside guilt givers, Reggie Harvey joins me live in studio in just a few moments to give his perspective on guilt, and guilt from the persona of the family dynamic. And that's going to be a lot of fun too, because I think a lot of us have experienced that. We know it quite well, and we've seen how it is effective on many of us on a day-to-day basis. Stay tuned. Live your true life perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. We'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
This is Jake Busey, and you're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, I've been talking about guilt. How to realize when guilt is actually taking over your life. We've talked about what guilt is, how it impacts us, the symptoms, where does it come from? All these things are so relevant because many of us feel guilt whether we're dealing with a situation in our life, whether it's a family member that might be guilting us. Maybe it's something we've done or something we haven't done that's making us feel guilty. Or we are guilting ourselves over something, or somebody's actually guilting us. And guilt is that thing that eventually we have to oust it out of our life, because what it does is it takes us off target. It takes us off base from where we need to go. It takes us away from our purpose, and it really creates this shadow over our life where we seem to not be able to get rid of it, and it doesn't have the substance that we need. We're just feeling guilty, but we really don't know for what. Joining me right now in studio, Reggie Harvey. Reggie is a good friend of mine, and he just wrote an amazing book, Anatomy of a Patient. Anatomy of a Patient is available on Amazon for sale, and it's written from his perspective of dealing with a near-death illness and how he has dealt with it, how he's overcoming it, and how he's dealing with it every day. Reggie, I'm so glad to have you in studio today. And, we were talking right during the break about guilt. How has guilt impacted your life? But better yet, has it ever impacted your life dealing with a family member?
Hi, Ashley. It's good to see you again. This is a very interesting topic. Guilt is a very complex idea, and it becomes woven tightly into the tapestry of our psychosis, I think, depending on whose respect we're trying to hold on to, or who are we trying to please. We've had some conversations about family members trying to control you by stepping over your boundaries and on all of that, and you dealt with that very well. Guilt is sort of a secondary but very powerful consequence of the dynamics of those family relationships. For me personally, I discovered this in my early 30s. In the story that I shared earlier with you about my mom, just assuming I was going to drop everything and rearrange my life to escort her on her venture. And finally, I pushed back this one evening. And I had never really sassed my mom before, but she just introduced the whole agenda for the next day, as if what time I was picking her up and where we were going and how long we were going to stay and how many days we were going to be there and blah, 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 blah. And I just told her, no, sorry, enjoy yourself, I'm not going. Now, as far as the guilt part of it, I had already said no. I'd already done the pushback. I'd already survived that. But then it dawned on me that she was really going to be angry that she didn't get her way. And I knew that she was going to play on my emotional strings and make me pick up the guilt for having disappointed her. And I realized that, wait a minute, I'm 30-some years old. I don't have to do this. I am not a child. That went through my head, and I just finally said, well, I've already kicked the bucket of milk over, so I might as well just stomp around in it a bit. And I said, Mom, I know you're going to be upset. Probably going to be upset for a while. I get it. But that's not my issue. That's your issue. You get to decide how long you choose to be upset about your disappointment. I said, now, I refuse to allow you to ruin my memory of you. Now, actually, I don't know where that came from, but I knew it would throw her off. And while she was catching her breath on that, I said, so if this has to be the last time we speak, know that I love you, but I'm not doing this again. I hung up the phone. I shook for half an hour. She didn't call me for another 2 weeks. But when she called me, it was as if nothing had happened. And we went on with our relationship in a much deeper and better place. But what I learned from that lesson is, suddenly it just made sense to me that, wait a minute, I'm not going to punish myself for something I didn't create. I'm not going to be a victim of the guilt card anymore. And what was really wonderful about that was not so much having stood up to my mom, because she'd never do anything to intentionally harm me. But what I realized is I was suddenly free. If I could tell my mom that, I could tell anybody that. My boss, colleagues, strangers, I didn't care. Because Mom and I had a special relationship. And if I'm not letting her get away with it, then I'm damn sure not going to let you get away with it. So that was my experience with a family member and the issue of guilt.
You know, when you were talking about that, Reggie, I just realized definitely boundaries are key in these situations when we're dealing with guilt, because a lot of times I think that guilt comes from many relationships where there's a codependent tendency, where we feel indebted or we feel the necessary need to do something because we've always done something. And being the child in that situation, being raised and her being the mom, as a kid, you probably always went along with everything, but finally you have your own identity. Was that an interesting turning point when you were able to create that boundary? Did you see that it was easier across the board?
Yes, it was. And surprisingly, I always knew my mom had a very strong personality, and I understood where that strength came from, and it taught me a lot. It brought me a lot of value. However, I also knew, sort of like in the reversal of roles situation, what do they say? We're a child twice and an adult once. We come into the world as a child, we are an adult, and then we return to childhood in the late years of our life. It was kind of somewhat like that. I realized that even though the strength that she had demonstrated to me over and over was also needing to be checked every now and then. And she had reared me to be respectful and to be strong. So the time just seemed right that, wait a minute, I think you're overstepping those invisible lines. And I'm going to push back and see where this goes. Our relationship should be strong enough to withstand it. And if it isn't, then we didn't really have the relationship that I thought we did in the first place. But if it did, it will be a little uncomfortable. But then in that uncomfortable state, we will begin to see who each other are. I needed to demonstrate to her that I had finally become an adult. I needed to claim that. And I needed to claim it at high noon in the light of the sun, not in the shadows. And that would in and of itself be a reward for my mom to realize, okay, he got it. He got those lessons. And that she could let go of those apron strings. But as long as I wasn't willing to cut them, she wasn't going to let go of them. And that's sort of what I figured out in that moment when she made that demand. And I just decided, no, I'm not angry, but I'm just not doing it.
Great perspective, Reggie. For everybody that's out there listening, our listeners right now, where can they find a copy of Anatomy of a Patient?
Well, actually, you can either go directly to the Amazon.com site and search for the book title Anatomy of a Patient, or my name, Reginald Harvey. Or you can go to my website, reggieharvey.net. That's REGGIEHARVEY.net. And find out a little bit more about me, about the book, and find a link back to the Amazon platform so that you can purchase the book there.
Reggie, I look forward to seeing you back in studio next week.
Thank you, Ashley. It's my pleasure to be invited to come.
I love Reggie's perspective. It's so true. When we are guilted by family members, it can be very hard to stand up and to create boundaries. It can be challenging. In that situation, he had fear. But he also knew that he had to stand up for himself. And so many of you right now are thinking about the situation. You've computed it into your own personal deal that you're dealing with. It might be with your dad instead of your mom or your sister or your brother. But you're beginning to realize that it's time to begin to stand up for what you need in your life and to not allow other people to control you, to create solid boundaries. And I'm going to be talking about that here in just the next segment, about things you can do to really focus and to understand if guilt is ruling your life. Triggers to understand and things that you can be aware of, and you can begin to change certain aspects of your life and make better decisions that put you in the driver's seat. If you haven't already, checked out my website, ashleyburgess.com, ashleyberges.com, and also check out YouTube. Watch new videos every week on relationship issues, family dynamics, creating boundaries, and the list goes on. Live your true life perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess. I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
You could be my luck.
Get in here. You're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, I've been exposing guilt and how to know when guilt has taken over your life. Right before the break, we were talking to Reggie, and Reggie was offering his perspective on guilt, especially with dealing with family members, which can be very challenging. I call them the outside guilt givers. The OGGA, the Outside Guilt Givers Association. I'm going to have to start my own group that's called that. It's going to be great. We're going to give guilt to everybody. Just kidding. Oh, it's great. But why do people create guilt in your life? To keep you under control, to control you, to get you to make a decision that's good for them. Okay, now think about that. So if you're being guilted right now into a situation, you need to think about how much are you allowing someone else to control you, to control your emotions, to control your actions. Think about that. What are you doing? How much control are you giving to other people? How long have you been giving this control to other people? And what can you do to make those changes? What can you do to make those changes? Because what happens here is that when we allow other people to control us, we get angry, we get resentful, we get fearful. And we hold it all inside, and then eventually we lose it. Okay? Well, you're the one that got in the way of my living my life, and if it wasn't for you, I could have done this and that, and you start hating on people when in reality, what happened is you let somebody else get in the way of your life, try to control you. Instead of having boundaries and creating those boundaries and putting your foot down and doing what's right for you, you end up kind of succumbing to that situation and then getting angry about it later on because it doesn't really benefit you. So here in the future, when you're dealing with situations and circumstances where guilt is obviously a used tactic, okay? Now remember, guilt is on both sides. You have the outside guilt givers, and then you have you. So what's happening is usually guilt is two-ply, okay, because we've been so schooled in the ways of guilt for so long, and we believe in it so much, and it's been used so much and so often in our lives, we begin to believe this is our own reality, and we live by it. So when somebody else gives us guilt, we kind of fall into that and go, oh, that feels about right, that seems about right, and so we kind of just allow it into our life. And so I want you to ask yourself, why am I doing this? Okay? Why am I doing this? If you're feeling kind of off. Like, a lot of times when someone's guilting you, it makes you kind of feel bad. You get kind of a bad feeling. You might feel a little anger, under the surface. Okay? And I want you to really be aware of your emotions, because most of the time we're not. And our emotions and the way we feel, our gut directly relates to the truth of a situation. It can help us to examine the situation, to understand the situation, to compute the situation, and to make the right choice. When we go against our guilt, that's when we get that pit of our stomach sick. When we go against our guilt, that's when we get those butterflies, not in a good way. When we go against our gut and we feel guilty, that's when we cause mayhem in our life and we begin to question our reality. Okay? And guilt to me is empty. And the reason why I feel guilt is empty is that guilt is one of these things that we harbor, but we don't really talk about it. We don't talk about it. So I want you to begin to bring it up. If somebody's asking you to do something that's really not good for you, antithetical to you, or really doesn't help you, I want you to think about that. And then I want you to have enough strength within yourself to bring it to light. I brought it up before where I felt like somebody was guilting me, and I said, hey, I care about you deeply, but I really feel right now you're putting me on a guilt trip. And maybe it's just me walking down that guilt trip, and maybe it's all internal, which it totally could be. But I want to be completely transparent with you because that's what I'm feeling. And, maybe you're wrong. Maybe it's not them. Maybe it's you. But by you saying it and bringing it up in a positive way, everybody kind of knows where everybody stands. You don't just get silent or quiet or angry or percolating or, you don't get all crazy like. Instead, you're just honest and you put the honesty out there. Another thing that you want to ask when you don't want to do something that someone else wants you to do is, if you don't do it, is it really hurting anybody else? If you don't, go their direction or follow their lead, will the world still be a safe place to live? And if you said yes, then you really need to think about what you're being asked to do, okay? And why are you feeling guilty? And you need to look at both sides. Is it the outside guilt giver, or is it you? Or is it both? And that's something that you really want to think about. I think also one of the biggest things that you want to think about is you want to bring it up. You don't want to live in the silence. And you need to really recognize when you need to do something for yourself. Because when we begin to feel resentment toward people and anger, it doesn't help anybody. You know what it does? It hurts everybody concerned. It hurts everybody because you begin to hold something over someone's head. You begin to see them in a negative light. And the more you see them that way, the more you don't want to be around them. The more you avoid them. And so I think that for the most part, we don't necessarily want to avoid the people we love. We don't want to give them the silent treatment. We don't want to be overly angry with them. I think we want to have healthy relationships with them. But in order to have healthy relationships with other people, we cannot be stuck in a guilt trip of codependency. Because all that does is wield its angry head and causes dissension and anger down the road. And it might feel crazy the very first time that you say no, because many of us don't have any boundaries. We've never had them. We weren't raised around them. We don't understand them. It's something very different in our life. And that's okay. That's okay. But we need to begin to understand that this is how healthy people live. Okay? And so the next time that your mother, your father, your sister, your brother, your best friend asks you to do something, I want you to really think about it. Is this good for me? Is this good for all concerned? How do I feel about this? How does my gut feel about this? Do I feel good? Or instead, do I feel kind of beaten down? Do I kind of feel used? Okay? I want you to think about that too. And I want you to feel that feeling before making a decision. Okay? And think about that, because nobody's going to give you a Medal of Honor for never doing what you want to do and for be considered the martyr, or always feeling like you're having to do stuff for other people and you never get to do your own thing. Okay? No one's going to give you a Medal of Honor for that. You've got to stick up for yourself, create the happiness you want, live your true life, not your best life, but your true life. What's truth? And this show offers the truth to help you find your true life uniquely and inspired. I hope this show has helped you. Please share this with your friends and family. And live your true life perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. I'll be back this time in 3 shakes.